Louisville is a city known for many things: world-class bourbon, historic horse racing, one-of-a-kind restaurants. But underneath the veneer of Southern hospitality lies many dark and twisted stories. From the darkest depths of the Ohio to the highest peaks of the Knobs, from New Albany to Newburgh, from Portland to the Highland, J-Town, Smoketown, Butchertown, and everywhere else under the shadows of the Twin Spires, these are Louisville True Crimes. The sun was rising lazily on a hushed December morning over what is now East Broadway in downtown Louisville. The city at the turn of the century was very different than the one we know these days, but at the same time not so different at all. Politicians were still squabbling over the results of elections. Warehouse owners were fighting tooth and nail to prevent workers from receiving a fair wage. As the saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Little 8-year-old Alma Kellner's mother was awake and bustling around the house to make breakfast for the family. Alma woke up, brought to life by delicious, intoxicating smells coming from the kitchen where her mother was standing over the hot stove. Alma made her way into the kitchen and gave her a hug and a kiss. Her mother was already awake and lively, because she had stirred awake before Alma to make her way to the first Mass at the family church, St. Boniface, which now sits on East Liberty Street. She decided to let Alma sleep in for the cold, brisk December morning. Alma had some of what her mother was cooking and began to prepare for her own trip to Mass, her belly full and warm. She told her mother she would go to a different church than St. Boniface. She wanted to go to St. John's Cathedral instead, which her mother said was acceptable, presumably so long as she made it to worship service at some point in the morning. After breakfast and getting dressed, Alma left the house and began walking toward St. John's Cathedral. From her home, near what we now know as the Highlands at the corner of East Broadway and Jackson Street, she walked north toward St. Boniface and eventually St. John's. It was a route familiar to her, as her family walked to church regularly on the same path. She walked past the family pharmacist, W.B.C. Yount's storefront. Yount waves, well familiar with Alma, expecting her to stop. But she did not, instead acknowledging him but continuing on her way to Mass. She walked past the local mailman, William Augustus. He spoke with her, also knowing her well through his time in the neighborhood. She also did not stop to speak more than passing kindness with Augustus and made her way on to church. This would reportedly be the last time anyone would ever see Alma Kellner alive. The day was getting on toward noon and the time for Mass had come and gone. Kellner's mother still hadn't heard from her. Kellner's aunt, who lived with the family, tried to reason with her sister. Alma was a little girl. Maybe she went to a friend's house. Maybe she decided to take a little afternoon walk. Alma's aunt tried her best to quell her mother's fear without much success at all. The alarm went out almost immediately. Her mother contacted everyone she knew. Father Schumann, the head clergyman at St. John's Cathedral, told Mrs. Kellner that he hadn't noticed Alma at the service. That was the first dead end. Mrs. Kellner contacted all the other churches in the area. She considered that maybe Alma had gone to another service, since the Mass at St. John's started an hour later than usual. No one besides Yount and Augustus had seen Alma at any point through the day. Another dead end. Mrs. Kellner reached out to the staff at Alma's school to ask if they could reach out to her friends in desperation, hoping that the unthinkable wasn't actually coming true. Much to her mother's dismay, not a one of her friends had spoken to or seen Alma since before her mother last saw her at breakfast. Yet another dead end. Her mother was growing more desperate by the minute. All of the threads available to tug on were coming undone with alarming speed. Hope was quickly diminishing for the safe return of Alma, but her mother never stopped looking. Alma's father, Frank Kellner, owned one of the larger local breweries, the Frank Fair Brewing Company, and was quite well known throughout the city at the time. Mrs. Kellner phoned Frank at work and explained the situation to him, to which he left work and came home immediately. Frank, Mrs. Kellner, and her sister had exhausted every possible lead they could think of, and no one had seen or heard from Alma since she left. They were at their wits' end trying to find their child, and eventually decided it was time to bring in the police. The police responded immediately, casting a wide dragnet right away, bringing on every able body they could recruit. The bigger search for Alma took off like a shot in the night. Information about Alma, height, weight, hair, and eye color, what she was wearing, the standard features in most missing persons cases, were passed on to the local hospitals, doctors, and pharmacists, including Dr. Yount. The family's hope against horrifying thought that their little girl was gone for good was that the local medical professionals would be able to identify her remains and inform the family post-haste should her body turn up in their care. With their already dwindling luck having run out, Alma Kellner would remain missing for over 6 months before her family received any information at all regarding her whereabouts. Her remains would eventually be found in the basement of the school at St. John's Cathedral, having been resting there since her disappearance. Alma's handkerchief and glove, stained with her own blood, were found near the altar inside of the cathedral, leading to the discovery of her body and giving more weight to the theory that she was not simply a victim of kidnapping. Her body, burned and now skeletal, was found at the bottom of the oven inside the cathedral, along with articles of clothing belonging to her murderer. Her frail body was stuffed through the fireplace in an attempt at a macabre makeshift cremation. Her remains would ultimately be interred in a cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. Louisville Police Chief J.P. Carney was assigned to the now high-profile case. One of the working theories on the disappearance was that because of Frank Kellner's position as a prominent local business owner, someone had kidnapped Alma for ransom. This theory was eventually debunked due to lack of evidence. There was never a ransom note found, nor anything else indicating the disappearance related to her father's position. The main theory was that she was kidnapped, but the reasoning wasn't clear, and most seemed to believe that she would likely never be seen again. Carney wasn't so sure. As a dyed-in-the-wool detective, his intuition told him differently, and he had no intentions to rest on his laurels and decided to find the truth in the case, spare no expense or effort. Carney, as all good detectives do, had a hunch, and that hunch led him to St. John's Cathedral, which had previously employed a suspicious janitor who quickly went on the lam following Alma's disappearance. Joseph Wendling came to Louisville from France with his brother-in-law, Louis Armstrong. The two took up residence in the city, and Joseph found work as a janitor. He began working at St. John's Cathedral and stayed there for a while. At some point in January, Wendling got into an argument with his brother and decided it was best that he should leave the city. At the same time, he also felt it appropriate to assume a fake name, that of Henry Jacquemin. Carney worked the case with vigilance. He eventually found a lead that took him to Hume, Missouri, and the home of a woman, Cora Moena. Cora had met Jacquemin in Houston through her aunt. They quickly fell in love and got engaged. Jacquemin would ingratiate Cora with tales of fabulous wealth, power, and other things all due him. He was guaranteed to be rich at any moment, or so he claimed, and Cora fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Eventually, though, his temper would prove to be more than Cora could handle. She left Jacquemin and broke off the engagement, moving back to Hume, where Carney now sat, to speak with her. She left Jacquemin and broke off the engagement, moving back to Hume, where Carney now sat to speak with her. She informed Carney that to the best of her knowledge, Jacquemin was still in Houston. Carney set his sights on the Lone Star State, setting off what would soon become the biggest and most expensive manhunt in U.S. history. Once in Houston, Carney hit the bricks and uncovered some information leading him to a grocery store where Jacquemin was allegedly working. Upon his arrival, Jacquemin had already quit this job and skipped town. Another dead end. Another lead took Carney to a ranch in San Antonio. Upon arrival at the ranch where Jacquemin had allegedly worked, the owner informed Carney that, much like the grocery store in Houston, Jacquemin no longer worked there and no one knew where he was. The same story. Another dead end. Over the coming months, Carney would hunt Jacquemin, or Wendling as you'll recall, through every single county in Texas. After exhausting every resource he could in Texas, Carney returned to Houston to regroup, collect himself, and come up with a plan to finally capture Wendling once and for all. He writes a letter to Cora, the ex-fiancée of Jacquemin, posing as her aunt. In his letter, he asked, as Cora's aunt, for Jacquemin's current address. It's unclear what reason he gave in the letter for needing the address. Nevertheless, it worked. Moena sent a letter with Jacquemin's current whereabouts, which unfortunately were nowhere near Texas. This time, Carney was headed to the Golden State. Carney arrived in sunny Los Angeles based on the letter he had swindled from Moena. He hunted Wendling for 3 weeks, turning up nothing of substance. Frustrated, he returned to his current makeshift base of operations in San Antonio. Leads about Wendling started trickling in from Los Angeles, leading Carney all over the state, chasing any information he could scrape together about the man he believed was the abductor and murderer of 8-year-old Alma Kellner. The tips Carney received started to bear more fruit than just a name or an address. Tips which led Carney to the city of Vallejo. Tips like Wendling working with a known criminal named Alice Miller. The language used in newspaper articles published at the time claimed he had consorted with Miller. Though the nature of their relationship was unclear, it's insinuated that they were criminally or sexually involved. What was clear was that the two had worked together in some capacity. Carney found out that Wendling was using his alias, Henry Jacquemin, while living and working in Vallejo. While there, Jacquemin had run afoul of the law, resulting in an outstanding burglary charge. Jacquemin found work in San Francisco as a houseman for a homeowner named Charles Weidenman. In his time with Weidenman, Wendling became intimately familiar with the house. After some time working with Weidenman, Wendling left to work on another ranch. Weidenman sold the home to a man named Charles Saunders after Wendling left, which we're left to assume Wendling was unaware of. After Wendling had left San Francisco, Saunders' home was burglarized 3 times. After returning to San Francisco, Carney tracks down Alice Miller. After searching her person, he found a picture of Wendling in her possession. As the leads quickly dried up, Carney received an anonymous letter leading him to the house where Wendling was hiding. A telegrapher from Port Reyes Station named Ray McAnally claimed he had been given an address of where to send Wendling's baggage in San Francisco, which led to his knowledge of Wendling's whereabouts. He then forwarded this information to Carney via telegraph. Carney sped off to the address, working against time, trying to reach Wendling before he eluded him once again, and making Carney's life just that much more complicated. As Carney arrived at the location, Wendling was found hiding under the kitchen sink of the home, which, at the time of this release, is now the offices for the Comcast Sports Network. Wendling was arrested and extradited back to Louisville, where he was ultimately indicted and charged in the murder and assault of Alma Kellner. Wendling would eventually be sentenced to life in prison. 9 years after his sentencing and conviction, he would attempt to escape the prison by taking clothes from the prison theater supply and dress as a woman attempting to escape the guards. Eventually, he would be caught and sentenced to 2 years more than life, thereby guaranteeing he would serve the rest of his life in prison with no hope for parole. Thanks for listening to the show. The show is produced, written, and hosted by me, Adam C. Thomas. Story and script editing is provided by Steph Parks. The show is engineered and recorded with special thanks to Matthew Davis with Hipfire Media and is edited by Tim Miller from Apparatus Sound. Don't forget to follow us across the social media landscape. We're on Facebook as the Louisville True Crimes Podcast, on Instagram at ltcpod, and on Patreon at www.patreon.com/LouisvilleTrueCrimes, or send us an email at LouisvilleTrueCrimes@gmail.com. Or you can always visit my website at www.adamcthomas.com. Another way you can help us tremendously is by going to iTunes and leaving us a rating and review, which helps us more than anything. The goal of all growing podcasts is to get as much steam behind them as possible through good ratings and reviews to help them rise through the ranks quickly. It costs you nothing but a moment of your time, and it helps us out tremendously. So if you like the show, head over there and help us out that way. And as always, we'll see you next time with more Louisville True Crimes.